October 14th, 1997. 5 college girls boarded the northbound commuter train at Hamilton Station. They were never seen again. The train arrived on time at its final stop, but their seats were empty, their bags still beneath them. What happened between mile marker 213 and track 9 remains one of the most haunting, unsolved mysteries in American history. Tonight, we reopen the case. We follow the echoes, the fragments of memory, the official records, and the secrets buried under decades of silence. If you believe forgotten voices deserve to be heard, subscribe and join us. The rain had begun an hour before dusk, a thin veil that blurred the lamps outside Hamilton Station into trembling halos of yellow. Margaret Talbot remembered the glow of that night every year, not because of the weather itself, but because of the phone call that followed. She had been 39 then, a single mother balancing teaching jobs and late-night grading when the news broke. 5 young women, her daughter among them, were reported missing from the train that rattled nightly across the New England corridor. The official story was simple. They boarded. They laughed. They carried sketchbooks, textbooks, one of them with a cheap guitar slung over her shoulder. They sat together in carriage B, across from a window that reflected the storm-smeared lights. And then, somewhere before track 9, the industrial siding outside Milford, the girls disappeared. The conductor swore he'd seen them half an hour before the train reached the final stop. Other passengers remembered the sound of their laughter. And yet when the cars were searched, the seats were empty. Their belongings remained. Their bodies never surfaced. It was the kind of mystery that newspapers devoured, turning the missing girls into a myth. The vanished 5. For weeks, the photos of their faces dominated front pages, from the local Gazette to the New York Times. For months, parents searched abandoned stations, old tunnels, forgotten spurs along the rail lines. And for years, silence reigned. The case went cold in 1999. The boxes of evidence were shelved, the leads grew stale, the witnesses scattered, and the train schedules rolled on as if nothing had ever happened. But the silence was deceptive, because some nights, years later, commuters swore they still heard echoes of voices on the empty platform at track 9. Laughter carried on damp air, whispers buried beneath the rattle of trains. And those who worked the late shift at the station, if pressed hard enough, admitted to feeling a draft of cold air where there should have been none, a fleeting glimpse of figures in raincoats by the edge of the track. It was, of course, superstition. Rational minds dismissed it. But when an old box of photographs surfaced in the basement of the now closed Hamilton Station in 2017, photos that hadn't been logged into evidence, people began asking questions again. Why had the investigation been shut down so quickly? Why had certain passengers' testimonies vanished from the record? And who had taken the photos of the girls just minutes before they disappeared? The answers weren't in the newspapers. They weren't in the police reports. They were buried deeper, in interviews never released, in train logs altered after the fact, in fragments of a night that had refused to stay silent. Margaret Talbot, now in her 60s, never stopped keeping vigil. On the anniversary, she returned to Hamilton Station even after it was shuttered, sitting on the bench where she had last waved at her daughter. She whispered into the rain, asking for a trace of the voices that the tracks had swallowed whole. The echoes always seemed closer on those nights. And in 2020, when a young documentary filmmaker decided to reopen the story for an investigative series, Margaret felt the stirrings of something she hadn't dared hope for in years. Not closure, not answers, but perhaps a beginning. Because the truth, like the sound of a distant train, was never really gone. It only waited, humming just beneath the surface, carried forward on steel rails and shadows. And somewhere beyond track 9, the echoes were growing louder. The train was late that morning, which felt like an omen. Eleanor Price waited on the platform at Hartford with her camera bag at her feet, her coffee cooling in one hand. At 32, she had the sharp impatience of someone who had lived too long on deadlines, her work as a freelance documentarian dragging her from one half-forgotten tragedy to another. This one was different. For months, she had been combing through stories of unresolved disappearances, but the case of the 5 girls from Hamilton had snagged her like a hook beneath the skin. The photographs that surfaced in 2017, faces turned toward the camera, smiling as if for a stranger they trusted, haunted her. Whoever took those photos had been close, maybe even the last person to see them alive. Yet the negatives had been stuffed into an unmarked envelope, hidden away in a basement archive. The train screeched into the station, brakes howling, and Eleanor boarded with a tightening knot in her stomach. Her producer had begged her not to get too close to this one, not to let it bleed into her, but the advice slid off her like rain. This wasn't just another story. Something about it felt alive. By mid-morning, she stepped off at the old Hamilton station. The building loomed gray and sagging at the edges, its once proud brick walls mottled with moss. The state had shuttered it in 2008 after budget cuts, rerouting traffic to a newer station down the line. But Track 9 remained accessible if one knew where to slip past the chain-link fence. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder and walked the perimeter. The chain-link rattled in the wind, and beyond it, the tracks stretched like scar tissue across the land, rusty and endless. The siding marked as Track 9 was half swallowed by weeds. "This is where you vanished," Eleanor murmured, almost without realizing she'd spoken. The place didn't feel abandoned. Not really. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the echo of her own footsteps bouncing back from walls once plastered with timetables. She found the bench, Margaret Talbot's bench, according to local lore, still standing near the window where the rain streaked down glass panes fractured by spiderweb cracks. Eleanor sat and lifted her camera. The lens whirred as she focused on the empty track. She imagined them, 5 college girls with the wind tugging at their hair, laughing, trading notes about exams or boyfriends, one of them strumming that guitar with chipped red paint. All so ordinary. Ordinary until the moment the train doors closed and someone, shifted the path of their lives forever. The silence pressed down until she had to stand. In the records, the conductor had insisted the girls were still there at 8:47 p.m., somewhere between Milford and Hamilton. Witnesses heard laughter from carriage B. By 9:10, the train arrived at its stop. 5 backpacks on the seats, 5 coats slung across the overhead racks, 5 girls gone. No one had seen them leave. No CCTV in the carriages in those days. The only cameras had been on the station platforms, and none showed the girls disembarking. Eleanor checked her notes. There had been a janitor on shift that night, a man named Carl Venn, whose testimony had shifted over time. First, he claimed he never saw them. Later, under pressure, he admitted he heard voices near Track 9 long after the train departed. That detail was buried in an appendix. She needed to find him. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Margaret Talbot. "I'll meet you at the diner, 2 p.m. Bring the photos." Eleanor tucked the phone away, unsettled. She hadn't told Margaret she had copies of the basement photographs. Only the archivist in Hartford knew she'd digitized them. The wind rattled the windows, and she caught herself glancing over her shoulder. The platform outside shimmered with rain. Somewhere in the rafters, a drip echoed steady as a metronome. She filmed a slow pan of the empty station, her voice low for the recorder. Hamilton Station. October 14th, 1997. The night 5 young women vanished between stops. No bodies, no sightings, only silence. Today, 2 decades later, the silence still feels heavier than sound. She lowered the camera, and in the quiet that followed, she could have sworn she heard it. So faint she doubted herself. Laughter, carried just beneath the whistle of the wind. The Hamilton diner hadn't changed much since the 90s. The booths still wore their red vinyl like tired skin. The counter still gleamed with a dull polish, and the smell of fried onions and coffee seemed baked into the walls. The only new thing was the absence of the smoke haze that had once hung in the air. Eleanor slid into a corner booth and set her camera bag beside her. She ordered coffee, though she'd had too much already, then pulled out her notebook and opened to the photocopied photos she'd brought. 5 girls in grainy color, standing on the platform in raincoats, their smiles blurred by motion. The bell over the door jingled. Margaret Talbot stepped inside. Time had pressed lines into her face, but her walk carried the same steady purpose Eleanor had seen in every profile written about her. She was the one who had never stopped returning to the station, never stopped funding ads or appeals, never stopped writing letters to officials who had long since stopped answering. Margaret spotted her and approached the booth. "You're the filmmaker?" she asked, voice clipped, guarded. "Yes, Eleanor Price." Margaret slid into the seat opposite and folded her hands on the table. Her eyes, sharp and blue-gray, scanned the photos spread across the notebook before Eleanor even spoke. "Where did you get these?" "They were found in the station archives," Eleanor said carefully. "Unmarked envelope." An archivist passed them to me before the boxes were sealed again. Margaret lifted one photo, her fingers trembling almost imperceptibly. She traced the edge of her daughter's raincoat sleeve, then set the picture down with a sharp breath. "They told us no photographs existed from that night," she said. Eleanor leaned forward. "Who told you?" "The police, the conductor, everyone. They said no cameras had captured the girls after boarding. Only this." She tapped the photo with her finger, her expression caught between grief and fury. "Proves otherwise." A waitress arrived with Margaret's tea, setting it down gently as if she understood the gravity at the table. Neither woman spoke until the waitress left. "My daughter's name was Anna," Margaret said finally. "She was 19, second year in college. She had a laugh that carried too far. Everyone said so. You'd hear her across a lecture hall. They said they heard laughter on that train." She stared down into her tea. "I've never stopped wondering if it was hers." Eleanor let the silence stretch. Documentaries lived in these pauses, the moments where words cracked open under their own weight. "Margaret," she said softly, "I need you to tell me everything you remember from that week. Every phone call, every detail you were told, no matter how small." Margaret's eyes flicked up. "Why?" "The police wrote it all down. The papers wrote it down." "Because stories change when they're written," Eleanor replied. "And because the truth might still be hiding in the things no one thought to record." For a moment, Margaret studied her. Then, with a weary nod, she began. "The girls boarded around 8:20. I waved to Anna through the window. She blew me a kiss. It was raining. I told her not to sit near the draft on the left side of the carriage. She laughed and rolled her eyes. That was the last I saw her." She sipped her tea. "I called her phone around 10 that night. It went to voicemail. I thought maybe the battery had died. By midnight, I knew something was wrong. By morning, I was at the station, demanding answers." Her voice trembled, but her gaze stayed firm. "They searched every inch of that train, found nothing but their belongings, purses, coats, notebooks. My daughter's bag still had her class notes from the day before. You don't vanish into the dark without your shoes, your coat, your things." She fell quiet again, her thumb rubbing against the rim of her cup. Eleanor opened her notebook. "What about the witnesses?" "The ones who said they heard the laughter." Margaret's eyes sharpened. "They changed their stories. First, they said yes. They heard voices, music even. Then, when the reports came out, most said they weren't sure anymore. Only one man stayed consistent, the janitor, Carl Venn. He told me he heard voices near track 9 after the train left. Later, he retracted it. Said he was mistaken." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Do you know where he is now?" "No one's heard from him in years." Some say he moved south. Some say he drinks himself senseless in town. I don't know, but I do know one thing. Margaret's hand tapped the photo again. Someone was there with those girls. Someone close enough to take this picture. And that person has never stepped forward. The bell over the door jingled again. Both women glanced up instinctively. It was just a man in a heavy coat, stomping rain from his boots. Still, Eleanor noted the way Margaret stiffened, as if habit had taught her to treat every stranger as a possible threat. The man sat at the counter. The clatter of plates resumed. Margaret leaned closer. You're going to stir this up again. You need to understand, people don't like the past dragged into daylight around here. Too many secrets buried under those tracks. I know, Eleanor said. No. Margaret's voice was firmer now. You don't know. Not yet. You think this is a story. For me, it's a wound that never closed. For others, it's something they profited from. And for some, it's something they helped bury. Be careful, Eleanor. You might not like what you find, Eleanor swallowed. But you want me to look anyway. Margaret's lips pressed thin, but she nodded. Yes, she said, because someone has to. They sat in silence for a long moment. Rain beat against the diner's windows. Eleanor's coffee had gone cold. At last, Margaret slid out of the booth. She gathered her coat, then paused. Track 9 was where they ended. She said quietly, That's what I believe. Not the main line, not the last stop. Something happened there. If you want answers, that's where you start. And then she was gone, her figure swallowed by the gray rain outside. Eleanor remained in the booth, staring at the photographs. The girls smiled up at her, unaware of what the next hour would take from them. For the first time since she began the project, Eleanor felt the thin edge of fear. It wasn't just a story. Margaret was right. Something here still lived in the dark, and the dark was already looking back. The rain hadn't stopped by morning. It streaked across Eleanor's windshield as she drove through the outskirts of Hamilton, the wipers ticking like a nervous metronome. Margaret's warning clung to her. People don't like the past dragged into daylight around here. She wasn't surprised. Every cold case she'd ever touched carried the same tension. Those who wanted truth and those who had built a life on its absence. Her first lead came from a faded entry in the 1997 police log. Carl Venn, custodian, Hamilton Station. Age 42 at the time, resided on Grant Street. If he still lived there, he'd be in his 60s now. Grant Street was a narrow lane of sagging porches and tired siding. She parked and double-checked the address. Number 18 leaned against itself like an old drunk, its shutters closed, the yard overgrown with brittle grass. She climbed the porch steps and knocked. No answer. A neighbor appeared on the adjacent porch, wrapped in a robe, smoking a cigarette. You looking for Carl? The woman asked. Yes, Eleanor said. Does he still live here? The woman shook her head. Not for years. Moved out. Oh, maybe 2010. Couldn't pay the taxes. Last I heard, he was staying at the Miller boarding house. Eleanor thanked her and headed back to the car, noting the way the neighbor's eyes followed her. The Miller boarding house sat on the edge of downtown, a 3-story relic with peeling paint and a neon vacancy sign that buzzed faintly even in daylight. Inside, the air smelled of damp carpet and boiled cabbage. At the front desk, a man in a stained sweater looked up from a racing form. I'm looking for Carl Venn, Eleanor said. The man's expression flickered, something between recognition and annoyance. He's here, the man said cautiously, but he don't like visitors. What's this about? I just want to ask him some questions about the old Hamilton station. I'm a filmmaker. The man chewed the inside of his cheek, then shrugged. Room 12. Good luck. The hallway was narrow, the carpet worn thin. Eleanor found the door and knocked. It opened after a long pause. Carl Venn stood in the gap, hair thin and gray, face creased with a hard life. His eyes were sharp but wary, like a dog that had been kicked too often. "What do you want?" he asked. "My name's Eleanor Price. I'm working on a documentary about the 5 girls who disappeared from the train in '97. His hand twitched against the door frame. "No, I only want to hear what you remember," she said quickly. "Your name was in the report. You said you heard voices near track 9 that night." He flinched as if struck. "I didn't. I was mistaken. That's what I told them. But at first, you said you did." His eyes darted down the hall, then back to her. "You need to leave. Now, Carl, please, if you know anything." He stepped forward suddenly, voice hoarse. "They told me to change my story. Do you understand? I changed it, and I'm still here, so that means I keep it changed." Eleanor's heart thudded. "Who told you?" Carl's jaw worked, his eyes glassy. Then he slammed the door. She stood in the hall, pulse racing. "They told me to change my story." Back in the car, she scribbled notes before the memory dulled. As she finished, movement caught her eye. Across the street, a man stood by a lamppost, collar pulled high against the rain. He wasn't watching the traffic. He was watching her. She turned the key in the ignition. The man didn't move. The engine coughed, then caught. She pulled into the street, glancing into the rearview mirror. The man was gone. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Stop asking about track 9. She tightened her grip on the wheel, the rain blurring the road ahead. This wasn't just reluctance. Someone was still invested in silence. And silence meant danger. The county archive occupied the basement of Hamilton's municipal building, a squat structure of red brick and tinted windows that had all the charm of a bunker. The clerk at the front desk barely looked up when Eleanor signed in, sliding her a visitor's badge before returning to his crossword. The archives smelled of paper and mildew. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting pale shadows across rows of filing cabinets and shelves stacked with gray boxes. Eleanor set her camera bag on a table, pulled on a pair of thin gloves, and began hunting for the 1997 files. They were there. 3 boxes, heavy and dust-coated, each stamped with fading black letters. Case number 97-311, Missing Persons, Hamilton Station. She pried one open. Inside, manila folders sagged with photographs, typed reports, scribbled witness statements. The weight of it pressed on her. 23 years of silence, compressed into paper. The first folder contained the official incident report. 5 names listed in neat type: Anna Talbot, Jessica Reed, Leah Myers, Caroline Ortega, and Bethany Cho. Their ages ranged from 18 to 20, all students at the university in Hartford. The report gave the timeline she already knew. Boarded at 8:20 p.m., last seen by the conductor around 8:47, train arrived on schedule at 9:10. Belongings left behind. The next folder held passenger testimonies. Most were bland. I don't recall. I may have seen them. There was laughter, maybe music. The words blurred together, vague and colorless, as if scrubbed clean. And then, one statement stood out. Witness, Maria Klein, age 24, passenger in carriage C. I went to the restroom around 8:50. Passing carriage B, I heard voices, girls laughing, but I also heard a man's voice, deep. I didn't recognize it. When I came back a few minutes later, it was quiet. Eleanor frowned. That detail wasn't in any article she'd read. She flipped through later summaries. The man's voice was omitted. The testimony reduced to heard laughter, then silence. Why? She photographed the page before slipping it back. Another folder contained conductor logs. She skimmed the neat handwriting until something caught her. Log entry. October 14th, 1997. Minor delay near mile marker 213. Signal change. Train paused approximately 4 minutes before resuming. No anomalies observed. Mile marker 213. Eleanor checked the maps tucked in the back of the folder. That was just before the industrial siding known as Track 9. Yet in the official timeline published later, there was no mention of a stop. The train was reported as running smoothly, arriving on time. She sat back, pulse quickening. A 4-minute pause. Unrecorded in public files. The archivist, an elderly woman with thick glasses, shuffled past and paused at Eleanor's table. "Digging up ghosts?" she asked dryly. "Trying to," Eleanor said. The woman peered at the box. "That case, people still whisper about it. My husband worked signals back then. Said something wasn't right with that night. Signals don't just change for no reason. Did he report it?" The woman's lips thinned. He kept his mouth shut. Said it was safer, and she walked on, her cart squeaking. Eleanor stared at the logbook again. Safer. Her phone buzzed. A new message from the same unknown number. "You should have listened." A prickle crawled up her neck. She glanced around the archive, but no one looked her way. The old clerk still scribbled at his crossword. The archivist bent over her cart. The room seemed ordinary, except for the weight of the words on her screen. She packed the files neatly back into their boxes. If she wanted to push further, she'd need to copy as much as she could tonight. But first, she needed air. When she stepped outside, dusk had fallen, and the municipal building's lamps flickered against the mist. Across the street, a car idled with its headlights off. She turned toward her rental, forcing herself to walk steadily. The car's engine rumbled. It didn't pull away until she had closed her door and locked it. She sat gripping the wheel, heart pounding, the copy of Maria Klein's testimony burning in her bag like contraband. Someone had erased the man's voice from the record. Someone had hidden the unscheduled stop near Track 9. And someone was watching her. Maria Klein lived 2 towns over, in a weathered colonial house with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. Eleanor found the address in the back pages of the archive files. An outdated contact, but one worth the risk. The road leading there wound through damp woods, branches arching overhead like ribs. By the time she pulled into the gravel drive, twilight had thickened, and the porch light flickered on as if it had been waiting. Mariah opened the door cautiously. She was in her mid-40s now, her hair tied back, eyes wary. "Yes, Miss Klein. My name is Eleanor Price. I'm working on a documentary about the Hamilton Station disappearances." At the word disappearances, Maria's lips pressed into a thin line. "I already told the police everything," she said. "That's why I'm here. Your statement, your original statement, mentioned something that never appeared in the official record." Maria's knuckles whitened on the door frame. "Who gave you that?" "The archive," Eleanor said. "I just want to understand. You said you heard a man's voice in carriage B. Can you tell me about that night?" Maria hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Come in before the neighbors start talking." Inside, the living room smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish. Family photos lined the mantel, children's drawings taped to the fridge in the adjoining kitchen. It was the home of someone who had built a quiet life and didn't want it disturbed. Mariah sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands twisting a dish towel. "I was 24, she began, coming home from visiting my sister. I was in carriage C. Around 8:50, I walked through carriage B on my way to the restroom. The girls were there, laughing, one strumming a guitar. And there was a man with them. Tall, dark jacket. I didn't recognize him. His voice was low, but I heard him say something like, 'Don't worry, it won't take long.'" Eleanor's pulse quickened. "You're certain?" Maria nodded. "When I came back, they were gone. Just gone. I thought maybe they'd moved cars, but when the train pulled into Hamilton, their things were still there, and everyone was shouting that 5 girls were missing." "Why didn't this detail stay in your statement?" Eleanor asked. Maria's gaze darted toward the window. as if checking for shadows. The next day, 2 men came to my apartment. They said they were from the investigation, suits, badges. They told me I'd misheard, that my testimony could create panic, make people think there was a predator on the train when there wasn't. They said it would be easier on the families if we kept the story simple. Just laughter, then silence. And you agreed? I was young, intimidated. They said if I kept insisting, I'd be called unreliable, a liar, that no one would hire me. So I signed the revised statement. She dropped her eyes. I still hear that voice sometimes, in my sleep. Eleanor leaned forward. Did you ever tell anyone? Your family? Friends? Maria shook her head. I tried once, years later. A reporter. 2 days after I spoke to him, he called back and said his editor killed the story. He sounded scared. That's when I stopped. Silence filled the room, broken only by the tick of a wall clock. Do you believe the man was connected to their disappearance? Eleanor asked quietly. Maria's answer came without hesitation. Yes, whoever he was with them when they vanished. A chill rippled through Eleanor. Do you remember his face? Maria closed her eyes. Not clearly. Just the jacket. The way he leaned toward them. Like he belonged. Like they trusted him. Eleanor wanted to press further, but Maria suddenly straightened. Her voice sharp. That's all I'll say. Please, leave it alone. You don't understand what it cost to dig at this. Some people don't want it opened. Eleanor rose slowly. Thank you for trusting me, even this much. Maria walked her to the door but didn't step outside. As Eleanor crossed the porch, Maria called softly after her. Be careful. The tracks don't like being disturbed. The drive back was long, the woods pressing closer in the dark. Halfway to town, headlights flared in her rearview mirror. Bright, unblinking. A truck had pulled onto the road behind her, following too close. Eleanor's hands tightened on the wheel. She accelerated slightly. The truck matched her. She took the next turn without signaling. So did the truck. Her breath quickened. Another turn, another shadow following. At last, she spotted the glowing sign of a gas station. She swung into the lot sharply, braking hard. The truck slowed at the intersection, idled for a moment, then rolled past without turning. Eleanor sat frozen, heart hammering, until the taillights vanished. When she finally pulled out again, the road felt different, emptier but charged. Maria's words clung to her. The tracks don't like being disturbed. But Eleanor knew it wasn't the tracks. It was someone alive. And whoever they were watching. The morning after her meeting with Maria Klein, Eleanor woke in her motel room to the rattle of rain against the window and the lingering image of headlights in her rearview mirror. She lay still, staring at the water streaking down the glass, wondering if she had imagined the pursuit. But her gut said otherwise. She dressed quickly, packed her camera bag, and drove to the county transportation office, a squat building at the edge of town that smelled of oil and paper. Its corridors echoed with the shuffle of boots and the low drone of fluorescent lights. At the records desk, a young clerk barely looked up from his computer. I'm looking for maintenance reports for October 1997, Eleanor said. Specifically for the Hamilton line, mile marker 213. The clerk frowned. That's ancient history. You'll want Mr. Hollis. He jabbed a thumb down the hall. Second door on the right. Mr. Hollis was in his 70s, wiry, with grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands. His office was cluttered with binders and maps. When Eleanor explained her request, his brow furrowed. Mile marker 213, that's the sighting out by track 9. What's your interest? I'm making a documentary about the 5 missing students, Eleanor said carefully. Something shifted in Hollis's face. Not surprise exactly, but caution. He pulled a binder from the shelf, flipping through yellowed pages. We log every signal change, every mechanical issue. But you won't find much from that week. Why not? Because the report's gone. He closed the binder with a thud. I looked for it myself years ago. Signal anomaly, October 14th, 1997. The train paused there, no reason given. Maintenance crew was supposed to check it, but the paperwork disappeared. Like someone pulled it right out of the file. Eleanor leaned forward. You're certain? As certain as I am about my own name. I even asked the foreman back then. He told me to let it lie. Why? Hollis's eyes darkened. Said accidents happen. Said nothing good comes from poking around Track 9. Then he retired early, bought himself a cabin in the Adirondacks. Funny thing considering his pension wouldn't cover that Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. Do you remember his name? Frank Dwyer. He'd be in his 80s now if he's still breathing. She scribbled it down. Hollis sat back, his chair creaking. You want my advice? Drop this. The report didn't just vanish on its own. Someone wanted it gone. Eleanor thanked him, though his words lodged in her chest. On her way out, she paused by a wall of faded photographs. Crews standing proudly in front of locomotives, arms slung over shoulders. She scanned the rows of faces until one made her freeze. A man in a dark jacket, tall, unsmiling, stood at the edge of a 1996 crew photo. His features blurred by time, but the posture, the tilt of the head, matched the shadow in Mariah's memory. Beneath the photo, the caption read, Hamilton Line, Maintenance Crew. Foreman, F. Dwyer. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out. Another message from the unknown number. You're walking the same tracks they did. Her hands trembled. She left the building quickly, the rain sharp against her face. In the parking lot, she scanned the cars. No headlights this time, no idling engines. Still, she couldn't shake the sense of being watched. Back at the motel, she laid out her notes. Maria heard a man's voice. Train stopped 4 minutes near mile marker 213. Maintenance report missing. Frank Dwyer retired suddenly. Lived well beyond his pension. The pieces aligned like rails converging. The girls hadn't vanished into thin air. Something had waited for them at Track 9. And whatever it was, someone had worked hard to bury it. Frank Dwyer's address came from a property record Eleanor pulled late into the night. An isolated cabin near the northern edge of the county, listed under his name since 1999. The timing sat heavy with her. 2 years after the disappearances, 1 year after his sudden retirement. She drove out the next morning, the road narrowing until it was little more than gravel bordered by dense pine. Mist clung to the trees, muffling sound. Her GPS flickered in and out. At last, she saw the cabin. It hunched against the woods, its roof sagging under years of snow and rain. A rusty pickup sat in the drive. Eleanor parked and approached, recorder tucked in her jacket pocket. The door opened before she knocked. Frank Dwyer filled the frame, a tall man now bent with age, his hair shock white, his face scored deep. His eyes, though, were sharp, measuring her. You're lost, he said flatly. I'm Eleanor Price, a filmmaker. I'm working on a documentary about the Hamilton Station disappearances. His expression didn't change. I've got nothing to say. She held his gaze. I found your name in the transportation logs. Mile marker 213, October 1997, the missing maintenance report. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. A shadow. Then he began to close the door. Wait, Eleanor said. You don't have to talk on camera. Just help me understand. The families deserve the truth. The door hung half-closed. Dwyer's hand trembled against the wood. You don't want this truth, he muttered. I do. He sighed heavily, then pushed the door open wider. 5 minutes, no recording inside. The cabin smelled of tobacco and old wood smoke. A fire smoldered low in the hearth. Papers and tools cluttered the table. Dwyer sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. The signals that night didn't fail. he said. "They were set. Manual override. I got the call to write it up as a glitch, but there was no glitch. Set by who?" Eleanor pressed. He shook his head. "Doesn't matter. They told me it was above my pay grade. My job was to shut up and retire early. The cabin, the pension bump, hush money." "Were you on the tracks that night?" Dwyer's eyes hardened. "No, and thank God, because whatever happened on track 9, it wasn't an accident." Eleanor leaned forward. "Then, what was it?" Dwyer looked past her, out the window to the gray woods. His voice dropped to a rasp. "They were delivered." The words hung like frost in the air. "Delivered to who?" Eleanor asked, heart pounding. Dwyer didn't answer. He only shook his head, as if the question itself was a weight he couldn't lift. Then suddenly he rose, agitated. "That's all. Go, Frank. Go!" His shout rattled the cabin walls. Eleanor backed toward the door. His face had twisted, fear bleeding through the anger. As she stepped outside, she turned once more. "If you change your mind—" "I won't," he cut in, voice shaking. "And you'd better not either." The door slammed. She stood in the damp morning air, pulse racing. Delivered. The word gnawed at her. On the drive back, she pulled into a gas station for coffee. As she stepped out, she noticed something scrawled on her rental's mud-smeared rear bumper, written with a fingertip. "Stop digging." She froze, scanning the lot. A man in a dark coat leaned against the payphone, smoking, his face obscured by the brim of his cap. When their eyes met, he smiled. Then he turned, dropped the cigarette, and walked away. Back in her motel room, Eleanor spread her notes across the bed like pieces of a dismantled machine. Delivered. The word echoed through her head. Not stolen, not vanished. Delivered. It suggested intent. A destination. A receiver. She dug through the scanned files on her laptop, combing maintenance maps and railway documents. Most were dry blueprints, numbers scrawled in neat handwriting. But in one margin, a notation snagged her. Siding 9, restricted freight, non-scheduled. Restricted freight. On a passenger line. The maps revealed more. Track 9 wasn't just a siding. It connected to an older spur that ran to a disused warehouse district on the edge of town. Warehouses long closed since the textile industry collapsed. Her chest tightened. She printed the map, circled the warehouse connection, and shoved it into her bag. At the county clerk's office the next morning, she asked for property records on the warehouses. The clerk, a young woman with tired eyes, pulled a dusty ledger. "Most of those places were foreclosed back in the 90s, she said. But one stood out. Warehouse 12. Transferred to a shell company in 97. No activity since. "Who owned the shell?" Eleanor asked. The clerk shrugged. "Hard to tell. Paper trail goes in circles. Pinecrest Holdings, registered out of Delaware. Classic blind." Eleanor copied the address. The warehouses sat a mile from the tracks, their hulking frames visible even through the drizzle. Rust streaked down their corrugated walls. Windows gaped like broken teeth. Warehouse 12 was set apart, its doors chained, weeds thick around its foundation. She parked nearby, her pulse quickening as she slipped through a gap in the fence. The air smelled of wet metal and rot. Inside, the vast space yawned empty, except for the marks. In the dust near the loading bay, faded tire tracks still etched the floor. At the far wall, the remains of wooden crates sat stacked in splinters, and scrawled on one of the concrete pillars, nearly worn away by time, was a word in black spray paint. Delivered. Her breath caught. She lifted her camera and filmed, her voice low and steady despite the tremor in her hands. Warehouse 12, connected to Track 9, property transferred weeks before the disappearances, evidence of restricted freight, and the word, delivered, painted here. Who was being delivered, and to whom? A sound broke the silence, metal scraping. Eleanor froze, listening. Somewhere deeper in the warehouse, something shifted. "Hello?" she called, though her throat tightened with fear. No answer. She stepped closer, her shoes crunching on debris. The air grew colder. Then she saw it, half hidden under a collapsed tarp. A row of folding chairs, rusted, set in a line as if for an audience, and on the floor before them, a single shoe. It was old, canvas faded, the rubber sole yellowed. A woman's shoe. Eleanor crouched, filming it, her voice barely above a whisper. This could be... A crash rang out behind her. She spun, heart hammering. A metal pipe clattered to the floor. Shadows shifted near the far exit. "Who's there?" Silence. She ran, clutching her camera tight, out through the loading bay and into the rain. Her car was where she left it, but the driver's side window was rolled down. She hadn't left it that way. On the passenger seat lay a scrap of paper, wet with rain. She snatched it up. The ink bled, but the words were clear enough. "Last warning!" Her chest heaved. She started the engine, hands shaking. As she pulled away, she glanced in the rear-view mirror. A man stood at the edge of the warehouse fence, coat dark with rain, watching her go. Margaret answered the door before Eleanor even knocked, as if she'd been waiting. Her eyes went immediately to Eleanor's face. "You've seen something," she said. Eleanor stepped inside, rain dripping from her coat, her breath still uneven from the drive. "It's worse than I thought." Margaret ushered her into the living room, where the same floral sofa sagged under its weight of memory. The muted light through the lace curtains made the space feel both protective and suffocating. Eleanor spread the photographs on the coffee table. The map showing Track 9's spur to the warehouse district. The spray-painted word. The rusted shoe. Margaret leaned forward, fingers trembling as she traced the grainy outline of the shoe. "It looks like Anna's. She wore canvas all the time. God help us." Eleanor hesitated before speaking. "Frank Dwyer told me the train stop wasn't an accident. The signals were overridden. And his words, he said the girls weren't lost. They were delivered." Margaret went rigid. "Delivered," she whispered, as if tasting the word burned her mouth. Eleanor nodded. "The warehouse records. Ownership changed hands right before they vanished. Shell company. No activity since. I think Track 9 was being used for something else. Not freight. Not passengers." Margaret's face drained of color. "We always knew there was rot beneath the tracks. Deals. Quiet money. But children, students." She broke off, clutching her chest. "That's not just corruption. That's evil." "They had help," Eleanor said. "The records disappeared. Maria Klein's testimony was rewritten. Maintenance reports pulled. Somebody powerful made sure the trail died." Margaret covered her mouth with her hand. Her eyes glistened. "I told myself for years it was just a failure of the system. A terrible mystery. But this was planned." The silence stretched, heavy. Rain tapped at the window like fingernails. Eleanor leaned forward. "Margaret, you knew those girls. What do you remember about that night? Anything unusual?" Margaret's gaze wandered to the mantel where an old clock ticked steadily. "I was manning the ticket counter. I saw them arrive, laughing, bright. They bought one-way fares, said they'd be back Sunday. They weren't nervous. They weren't running from anyone." She paused, eyes distant. "But there was a man. He came to the counter just after them. Asked about connections past Hamilton. Tall, dark coat. I didn't think much of it at the time. Just another traveler." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "Did you recognize him?" Margaret shook her head slowly. "Not then. But when I saw your photo from the maintenance crew..." She pointed to Frank Dwyer's group shot. Her finger hovered over a blurred figure at the edge. "That one. He was the man." Eleanor's throat tightened. "You're certain?" Margaret nodded. "Certain." The weight of it pressed into the room. A man embedded in the railway, standing in line behind 5 college girls, guiding them toward track 9. Margaret drew a shaky breath. "Eleanor, if you keep pulling, you're going to find bones no one wants unearthed. The people behind this, if they could bury 5 girls, they can bury you." Eleanor stared at the spray-painted photo. The single word, "delivered." Her reflection warped in the glossy print. "I can't stop," she said softly. "Not now." A floorboard creaked outside the living room. Both women froze. Margaret's head snapped toward the hall. "Did you hear that?" Eleanor rose silently, heart pounding, and moved to the doorway. The hallway was empty. The front door was still locked, but when she peered through the lace curtain, she saw it, pressed into the wet earth of the front walk. A boot print, fresh. The boot print outside Margaret's house lingered in Eleanor's mind all night. She barely slept, jolting awake at each sound from the motel's thin walls. By dawn, she had already packed her bag and decided she couldn't stay there another night. She drove to the nearest library, its stone facade mottled with rain. Inside, the quiet hum of computers felt almost safe. She settled into a corner terminal and pulled up corporate registries, starting with the name Margaret had seen, Pinecrest Holdings. The database search yielded little. A registered address in Delaware, a single incorporator's name, no officers listed. It was a dead end by design. But Eleanor had learned to read between the lines. Cross-referencing Pinecrest with regional real estate transactions, she saw the same entity surface again and again in the late 90s. Warehouse purchases, trackside lots, always near transport hubs, always shuttered within a year. And one more disturbing connection. Pinecrest had also purchased land along the freight spur south of Hamilton, property that had later been resold quietly to a local politician's trust. She clicked deeper, tracing the filings. The trust was still active. Its listed beneficiary, Senator Alan Whitford. Eleanor leaned back, breath catching. Whitford had been the golden boy of the county, mayor in the 90s. Now a long-serving senator with national ambitions. A line from Frank Dwyer came back to her. "It was above my pay grade." The chain snapped into place. A shell company buying derelict warehouses, connected sidings, then vanishing. Land later funneled into respectable hands. And in the middle of it all, 5 girls, last seen alive on a train that paused just long enough at track 9. Her hands trembled as she typed notes. The screen suddenly flickered. A message popped up, plain text across the search page. "You are being monitored. Close this window." Eleanor's breath froze. She hadn't typed it. She slammed the laptop shut, heart hammering, and swept her papers into her bag. Around her, the library seemed unchanged. Students hunched over books, an old man dozing by the radiator. But she felt eyes on her. She left quickly, glancing over her shoulder as she walked to her car. The lot was nearly empty except for a dark sedan parked 3 rows away. Its engine idled, exhaust curling in the cold. Eleanor got into her rental, locked the doors, and drove. She circled side streets, doubling back, watching her mirrors. Each time, the sedan followed. Finally, she pulled into a crowded grocery store lot and parked between 2 trucks. The sedan cruised past, slowed, then disappeared into traffic. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number again. "You've gone too far." Her fingers shook as she typed a reply for the first time. "Who are you?" The dots blinked. Then, "Stop or end like them." She dropped the phone onto the passenger seat, bile rising in her throat. The faces of Anna, Jessica, Leah, Caroline, and Bethany flickered in her mind, frozen in yearbook photos, full of promise, unknowing. Margaret's warning returned. They can bury you too. But Eleanor felt something harder coil inside her. Rage resolve. If they were watching, let them watch. She would dig deeper still. Eleanor left the grocery store lot with her hand still trembling on the wheel. The sedan was gone, but she knew it wasn't over. Whoever shadowed her wanted her frightened enough to stop. But fear had hardened into something else. She drove straight to the county archives, demanding access to building inspection files for the warehouse district. The clerk hesitated, but Eleanor leaned on her press credentials, invoking the Freedom of Information Act until he relented with a sour look. In the dim reading room, she flipped through boxes of brittle paper until she found it. Warehouse 12, Inspection Report, 1998. The file was thin, too thin. A few standard forms, but one handwritten note at the bottom froze her. Sub-basement sealed. Access restricted. Pinecrest Holdings authorization required. Eleanor's throat tightened. A basement. Hidden. She photographed every page, slid the file back, and left before anyone could stop her. The warehouse loomed again that evening, a hulking shadow against the fading sky. She parked farther away this time, leaving her car behind a line of scrub trees, and approached on foot. The loading bay doors still sagged on their chains, but along the side wall, half buried in weeds, she found a hatch. Rust ate its hinges, but the padlock was newer, a jarring gleam of steel against decay. Her hands shook as she pulled a crowbar from her bag. The lock snapped after several blows. The hatch groaned open, releasing a gust of stale air. Stairs descended into darkness. She flicked on her flashlight and began to climb down. Dust thickened in her throat. The air smelled faintly metallic, like old blood. At the bottom lay a concrete corridor, its walls damp, its ceiling low. The beam of her light caught metal fixtures bolted into the walls. Rings, chains still attached. Her stomach lurched. She moved farther, her footsteps echoing softly. A larger chamber opened, lined with rows of narrow metal cots. Rust streaked the frames. On one, a strap remained buckled. On another, a scrap of faded fabric lay curled. Blue canvas. Eleanor reached out with trembling fingers. The fragment flaked at her touch, fragile with age, but the color was unmistakable. Her breath came ragged. She lifted her camera and filmed, whispering, "Warehouse 12, sub-basement, evidence of confinement, chains, cots, a scrap of fabric, possibly clothing. This is where they were taken." A sound cut her words short. Footsteps above. Her heart leapt into her throat. She switched off the flashlight, plunging the chamber into darkness. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate. A door clanged, voices murmured. Eleanor crouched, pulse roaring in her ears. Light spilled down the stairwell, harsh, yellow. Shadows stretched across the concrete. Two men descended, their flashlights sweeping. "Told you someone broke the lock," one muttered. Eleanor pressed against the wall, every muscle screaming to run. The men reached the chamber. Their beams washed over the cots, the chains. "Boss won't like this," one said. "Doesn't matter. We clean it out tonight." They moved deeper, their backs to her. Eleanor seized the moment, darting into the corridor. Her shoes barely whispered on the floor as she fled toward the stairs. She climbed fast, lungs burning, every creak of metal sounding like thunder. At the hatch, she shoved it open and spilled into the weeds. Rain slicked her face as she scrambled to her car. Behind her, shouts rose. She flung herself into the driver's seat, started the engine, and tore away, gravel spitting under her tires. In the rear view, flashlights bobbed wildly at the hatch, then vanished. Eleanor's chest heaved. Her camera sat in the passenger seat, still recording, the evidence safe inside. She whispered to herself, voice shaking. They weren't lost. They were delivered, and they were held here. The motel no longer felt safe. After escaping the warehouse, Eleanor drove straight past its neon vacancy sign and kept going until she found a truck stop off the highway. She parked under the harsh canopy lights, the rumble of diesel engines her only company. Inside the cab of her car, she watched the footage she'd captured. Chains clinking against concrete, rusted cots, the scrap of blue canvas trembling in her hand. Her own whisper, "This is where they were taken." The images made her skin crawl, but they were proof. Irrefutable proof. She copied the files to 3 different memory cards, sliding one into an envelope she addressed to a colleague back in New York. She'd mail it first thing in the morning. If anything happened to her, the footage would survive. By dawn, she was in the lobby of the county sheriff's office, exhaustion hollowing her eyes. She requested to see Detective Alvarez, the one still officially assigned to cold cases. Alvarez arrived after an hour, tall, silver-haired, with a face worn by decades of disappointment. He listened as Eleanor laid out her findings, her voice tight with urgency. She showed him the photos, the maps, the footage. When the video ended, the room was silent but for the hum of the air conditioner. Alvarez rubbed his jaw. "You realize what you're saying? That these girls weren't lost. That they were trafficked with help from the inside. That a sitting senator's hands are dirty." "Yes," Eleanor said. "And I have proof." Alvarez leaned back. His eyes searched hers. For a moment, she thought she saw something soften. Admiration, maybe, or pity. Then he stood and walked to the door. He opened it and 2 deputies stepped in. Eleanor's blood chilled. "Escort Miss Price to her car," Alvarez said evenly. "Make sure she leaves town." Eleanor's voice cracked. "What? You can't bury this." Alvarez's gaze hardened. "You don't understand. This county has lived under their thumb for decades. You don't just pull it out by the root. You get killed. And maybe worse, others get killed too. The only reason you're walking out of here is because I'm giving you that chance." The deputies flanked her. Eleanor gathered her bag, her chest a hollow drum. Outside, the sunlight felt poisonous. As she walked to her car, her phone buzzed. Another message from the unknown number. "Told you to stop." Her hands shook as she gripped the wheel. For a long moment she sat motionless, staring at the courthouse across the square. Then she made a choice. She drove not to the post office, but to the newsroom of the local paper. The Hamilton Chronicle. The building was small, glass front smudged, but it was independent, not chained to the same old networks of power. Inside, a young editor blinked at her as she set the envelope and her camera on the desk. "This is everything," Eleanor said. Her voice was steady now, cold with resolve. "The disappearances. Track 9, Warehouse 12. If you print it, people will know." The editor stared at her. "And if it's true, you'll be hunted." Eleanor exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. "They've been hunting me already." The editor nodded slowly, then reached for the envelope. Outside, as Eleanor stepped back into the square, the clock tower struck noon. The bells rang hollow across the town. She looked once toward the courthouse where Alvarez's silhouette lingered in an upstairs window. He watched her for a moment, then turned away. Eleanor tightened her coat around her, the memory of the 5 girls pressing close. Delivered, not forgotten. Not anymore. The Hamilton Chronicle printed the story 2 weeks later. Front page, black headline, photographs of the warehouse basement, the chains, the cots. The word, delivered, scrawled on concrete. It spread fast. Regional news picked it up. Then national. Senators demanded inquiries. Families of the missing 5 girls stood before cameras, their grief finally validated after 23 years. Margaret wept quietly when Eleanor visited her. "You gave them back their voices," she said, clutching her hand. "You gave us all something to hold on to." But Eleanor knew the cost. She had moved twice in as many weeks, her email filled with threats. A car idled too long outside one night, vanishing when she opened the curtains. Detective Alvarez retired suddenly. No statement, no farewell, just gone. Frank Dwyer was found dead in his cabin, ruled a heart attack. Eleanor didn't believe it, and Senator Alan Whitford announced he was stepping back from public service for health reasons. No charges ever filed. His trust dissolved quietly, assets scattered like ash. The Chronicle fought to keep the story alive, but the news cycle moved on. Other scandals, other outrages. Only the families remained. They left flowers at Hamilton Station on the anniversary, candles flickering in the glass wind. For the first time, they said, the grief felt less like madness and more like mourning. Eleanor sat among them one evening, her camera off for once, simply present. She thought of Anna's canvas shoes, Jessica's quick laugh, Bethany's sketchbook, Leah's scarf, Caroline's quiet smile. Girls she had never met, but now carried like ghosts. As the station emptied, she lingered alone on the platform. The rails gleamed under the sodium lamps, stretching into the darkness where Track 9 once branched away. The siding had been torn up years ago, weeds swallowing the gravel. But when the night wind shifted, Eleanor swore she heard the faint rattle of wheels, the echo of laughter, the shriek of a whistle long since silenced. She closed her eyes. Somewhere deep beneath the soil and concrete, the tracks still remembered, and they whispered,